Thank you, Georgina, for those important lessons from the UK experience. I wonder if all the panellists would like to take their seat at the panel, and also Jelena, would you like to come and join the panel? We have approximately 20 minutes for discussion, so I will open up the floor to questions when our panellists have settled. Carol, would you like to come and join? Come on. You gave a great presentation. I think you should come and take the responses. Well done, thank you. Okay, so are there any questions? Andrew.
Hi, thanks all for really great presentations. This is more of a comment for Georgina, but I hope she might have something to say. And I noticed that Blanard is not here, so I can say whatever I want about the Takeover Directive now. Marcus and Partners wrote a really interesting, very long and well thought out report on the Takeover Directive, which then went to the Commission, which then wrote its review, which was what you were referring to. The Marcus and Partners report is brilliant if you're not a neoliberal person, because it contains formal acknowledgement of all the arguments that we as critics of the Takeover Directive make. And the one that I want to just tell you about really is the community control gap that they identified. And they said that when companies are acquired by hostile takeover by other companies from a long distance, those companies are much less caring of what actually happens in the jurisdiction where the company operates, much more likely to be environmental damage. They said we can't quantify this problem here, and it may be that takeovers are desirable, but the issue remains significant and requires further exploration. Now, the Commission, in reviewing the Takeover Directive, how much do you think it considered this argument? Or do you think it ignored it altogether? That's my question of everybody here. And Georgina can probably give the answer. Thanks.
Yes, please, sorry. Yeah, please respond.
Is this on? Oh, great. Yes, indeed. Last summer, I remember I spent a whole month going through 300 pages, and then I saw the Commission summary, and it only touched upon the issues that the Commission thought were important and hid the rest. So, yes, a very good observation, which I failed to make during my presentation. Coming back to the question, yes, I don't think the Commission addressed this, and also I was disappointed with the report, the external study as such, because it did use information from different other countries as a good model, but then it was quite ambiguous as to what exactly should be changed or incorporated in the directive as such. So I think I was referring more to the fact that there were no concrete proposals for reform, but suggestions as to what is different. Another issue which I found interesting is that we have a divergence between the goals that the directive had a few years ago, which were focused on takeover facilitation, creating a level playing field, and then when one goes, and you're quite right that now it seems that they are taking stakeholder interests into consideration, because when looking at the external study, we see that it does take into consideration that the directive fails to protect shareholders and other interests during the takeover process, which was something which in the Winter report was completely bypassed and not referred to. So I think the report was very, very positive in that sense, and it's a shame that the summary that the Commission provided is quite a different version of a summary. It's picking the right the right sections. But yes, the report is more elaborate, and hopefully that's why I think it's important to make concrete proposals for reform, because based on that study, we can therefore use it to support claims that we couldn't make a few years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Beate, I think you were next.
Thank you, and thank you to all the speakers for very interesting presentations. I wanted to go back to also the issue of the takeover directive, and also linking to what Thomas said about the importance of economics. I think many of us will agree that economic theory and law in economics is important. But it's the way that it's used and which theories and which postulates deriving from theories that legislation is based on. And the Takeover Directive is a very good example there. We see that from the Winter Report, that base their report and their compromise solution that led to the adoption of the directive on this idea of a market for corporate control being the fix for that would give us more efficient and competitive European businesses. And in spite of the fact that there was a report commissioned by the European Parliament that showed some of the problems with this idea. So I agree that the Marcus report is really good in that respect, and it's a shame that it hasn't been followed up more by the Commission. And I also wanted to comment on what Georgina said about the definition of the interest of the company that the board is meant to promote, because it's very interesting that the Takeover Directive actually refers to a company interest concept which hasn't been possible to agree on in an EU context. But the Takeover Directive does that, and the 2006 revision of the second Companies Directive does that, and now it's time that the Commission then turns to the company law scholars in Europe and ask, can you actually help us fill this concept with some kind of meaning, instead of that just being filled with a shareholder primacy drive. And I know we've discussed this before, Georgina, and I think you probably have some more comments on that, how that could be changed, because it's very important that when we're talking about company law and reporting and the investors, that we don't forget these very strong drivers through the takeover regulation that is driving the short-termism.
Yeah. Would the panel like to comment? Yes, Thomas.
Does it work? Oh yeah, it works. It's a good point also on the field of Polish law. I mean, there were about 10 hostile takeovers which I researched during the last 6 years. I mean, there were 125 takeovers, of which 10 were hostile, and they all allow some space for stakeholder value when analyzing the company's interest. I mean, when according to the directive and the Polish capital market law, when the board makes its opinion about the takeover, when there's a hostile takeover, they criticize all aspects. But speaking about company interest, they usually point out the employment and point out the stakeholders, and not only the shareholder value. So the shareholder value, the price, is just one aspect of this opinion, and other aspects are even more emphasized in all. As I said, a bit less than 10 examples of hostile takeovers.
Celia.
I'll just also say the United States law on takeovers is radically different than what the Takeover Directive stipulates. And Professor Mellon mentioned yesterday constituency statutes, which actually came into place in the 1980s as a way to give directors a way to fend off hostile takeovers, and specifically do allow taking into account some of the longer-term interests. Arguably, under our law, you don't even need the constituency statutes any longer to take those into effect. So maybe there's some room for comparative analysis there.
Thank you. The gentleman with the yellow tie. Who are you?
Hi. I agree with Celia that we can dream, of course. I'm just reading an article in the Guardian from where David Lynn, a former councillor, said. Investors see sustainability concerns being raised mainly as a bunch of noise. Like, we shouldn't kid ourselves, investors don't care. Or at least most mainstream investors don't care. So it indeed comes back to the issue of materiality, and I agree with Charlotte that From a legal perspective, I think it's important for all of you, and I would like to hear the perspective, of course, of the panelists, that it's important to define how and when environmental and social issues are material for companies and therefore for investors, and through that make it a requirement, not a voluntary opportunity, but a requirement for companies to do that. So that's one issue I would like the panel to respond on. And then second question for Thomas, on CSR and sustainability indices. I mean, a lot of indices have been set up. I work for UNEP Finance Initiative, and we're involved in an initiative called the Sustainable Stock Exchanges, where sustainable stock exchanges are set up next to mainstream stock exchanges, or sometimes even by them themselves. However, the amount of money being traded on those stock exchanges is close to zero. So how do you address the gap between us trying to address sustainability from a niche perspective and trying to mainstream it?
Okay, so the two questions there. One relating to the potential for a requirement for ESG information in a way to pursue a genuine responsibility. And then questions particularly directed at you, Tomasz, about the stock exchanges information. So, Celia.
Just to speak to the materiality point, I mean, legal regimes have forever grappled with what is material or is not material in the varying ways we could define it. So I won't presume to have an answer for that particular question. However, one way we might get around it is to take materiality out of the equation and simply require reporting of any numerical matrix you can come up with. The content of the reporting is something I think we need to think very carefully about, but if we want to avoid the problem that companies can always make materiality arguments, you could simply eliminate it, which we have seen in some of the reporting requirements recently enacted in the United States. They've just eliminated that entirely.
Yeah. Anybody else on the panel? Yes, Jelena.
Well, first, hello everybody. I'm coming from the investor perspective. I work in the Responsible Investment Department in PGGM, which is a Dutch asset manager for the second largest Dutch pension fund. And for the materiality, we often look at it because to us it's also very important. And we make investment decisions based on the ESG information that is out there. And therefore, I think reporting is very relevant for us. And so when we look at materiality, I was trying to, there are so many things that I can say, so now when I have to say something, it's difficult to decide what to say and what not to say. But we have, we are working with data providers, so just to say how mainstream sort of investors, institutional investors work. We work with data providers, which obtain, from them we obtain data on the company's reporting on ESG, so environmental, social, and governance issues. And some of these data providers, so we mostly work with two companies. One of them is MSCI and the other one is Sustainalytics. And they already work in two different ways. So one of them provides what we call data mining information. So they just, on a wide range of indicators, environmental, social, and governance indicators, they provide us with information of how the companies are performing. And that's about 170 indicators. So then we have to decide based on our beliefs what is important for which sector and what we want to look at and what we think it's irrelevant. But then the other MSCI provider, which is perhaps for investors a bit more mainstream, they already have picked 5 to 6 KPIs that they think are material for the company's performance. So that they feel that they have impact on the financial return of the company. So for example, if you look at banks, then they will focus more on the governance indicators. And if you look at mining, it will be more about environmental, social, human rights, and issues like that. So what we have to decide is how to basically find a way to use this into our investments and how to just how to use this information, how to make investment decisions based on this. When you think about what's material, perhaps you can look at what the investors look at, because we are very busy with thinking what is material for the companies. Of course, we are looking at what is material, so how climate change can have an impact on a company's performance and how they can have a financial, basically financial impact. So I don't know if that's the materiality we are talking about here, but that's what we are looking at. And there is this research made by Dr. Axel Hesse. He made it with the German Ministry of Environment. He made the research of all these data providers, because there are more of them, they're not just Sustainalytics and MSCI. He made the research of which of these factors and indicators that all of them research are the most material. And he did this for 68 industries. So maybe this is something that you can look at. At least it will give you some more information on what the investors deem as material.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question, so would you like to make a quick response, Tomasz?
Yes, I will. So, firstly, what my point was is that this idea, the sustainable indices idea, in my opinion, needs further research. I mean, there is no wide, complex research regarding those indices. We only know that there are some, and we know, secondly, we assume, and I emphasize assume, it is a good initiative. Firstly, it needs further research. Secondly, I would recommend some tax deductions just for the investment funds who use sustainable indices as a benchmark. In my opinion, how would it work? It's easier to run investment fund, so more money goes to sustainable companies, which is easier for them to raise capital. The effective interest rate would be lower. In my opinion, some European Commission document would be desirable. I mean, own initiative opinion or on a recommendation regarding those issues. I know that, of course, the stock exchanges are private entities, but it's not an obstacle to make the own initiative opinion or the recommendation.
Thank you. And we just have time for one more question.
Have I answered your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I have a question which was inspired by slides of Thomas showed. He recommended in the last slides, and I repeated it, that the Commission should give an own initiative recommendation, for instance, a soft law instrument. However, I think in October the Commission disclosed a proposal on a regulation of benchmarks, which covers all possible indices. It's inspired by the LIBOR scandal, which was referred earlier today by the Commission representative. So a direct question to Thomas, and then later to the Commission representative. Do you believe that, or do you think that these sustainable indices should be excluded from this benchmark regulation? That could be an idea because it's quite a heavy instrument. And then the second question to the Commission representative, that is it feasible that within the Commission, which is often blamed to be a silo organization, that there would be a horizontal sustainability test of all possible proposals, something like, which is an impact assessment board, which is used, that it would be part of that assessment? Thanks.
Okay, if you could keep your response brief, because lunch awaits us. Thank you.
To be frank, we could discuss it later, but I have no strong idea about whether it should be included or not in what you said. My point was is that we should firstly raise awareness of those indices and make it more common. And as I said, I'm not sure. I don't have any strong opinion, so I can't answer your question. But still, as I said, my first point was to raise awareness about indices, because as the studies show, not many investors pay attention to those indices, and they don't know how they are constructed and how really they do work. So this is the main problem: not constructing the index, but raising awareness.
Okay, and Robin?
Yeah, no idea whatsoever on the whether it should be included or not. I have to look at the Edgemark proposal. I've not seen it personally, so I can't really make a judgment on that. As regards the sustainability tests and the impact assessment board, I have the privilege of being one of the members of the Impact Assessment Board, and probably the longest standing in that body. At the origin, sustainability was embodied in the integrated impact assessment principles and guidelines. So I don't see how these separate tests could be organized, and when looking at the trade-offs that sustainability entails between different parts, the different pillars of sustainability, this is really a very delicate matter. We try to do our best with the current guidelines, but I don't see how these guidelines could be radically changed in order to promote better sustainability. The guidelines are there. It's the way they are implemented which matters.
Thank you. So that just leaves us with room for final brief comments from our panellists, if you have any. No? Okay, well, thank you for a very interesting discussion, a wonderful session, and we'll be carrying on with this topic in the next session after lunch. Thank you very much.